Greetings, everyone! It's I, Dracovin, and welcome back to the world of darkness. Are you ready to dive back in with Mage The Ascension today? Yes, we are talking about another of the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions, the Society of Aether, or Sons of Aether, depending on the edition. Or Sons a little bit more older, Society was used in M20. Just keep that in mind. Anyway, just as a quick note, remember to give the various things for YouTube, like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that stuff. Let's dive in. Let's grab our grimoires, and actually in this case, let's grab our goggles, put on our Victorian garb, prepare our clockwork devices. We are going quite steampunk today. Yes. So, who are the Sons of Aether, Society of Aether? Who are these people? Well, that's a really good question to start with, but usually I like to talk about where I get a lot of my information from. And, Mage The Ascension, the normal books, and of course the two Sons of Aether tradition books. It's a very simple source of a lot of information. The M20 book is probably your most up-to-date, but any of the original core books for Mage will do you, giving you a basic idea of who these are. And who are they? Well, they're a group of technomancers. Yes, they are technomancers. They were originally part of the Technomancy and the Order of Reason. But, unlike the rest of the Technomancy, they joined the Council of Nine. An interesting thing that occurred, that they broke away from the Technomancers and the conflict to join the other side. We'll talk about it in their history. But it is a defining moment that has made a group that is a little bit more dreaming when it comes to the Technomancy on the side. They basically abandoned their former compatriots after the Technocratic Union aided the expulsion of the Lumiferious Ether from the Consensus. Basically, their core of study. When they said Ether was not something that would be in their version of science, their version of technology. And since then, they basically gone and adopted some outdated technologies and incorporated them into Paragon. And they are the seat of matter on the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. They're also known as Etherites. We should talk about Paragon. What is their way of thinking? What is their patagram that they follow? Well, it's not a difficult one to talk about because it's all about science. When I say science, it is capitalized. It's like when talking about Rome, little e empire versus big E empire. In this case, it's big S science. That is the key to it. They use that big S to distinguish it between sleeper science, exotic theories of orgone fields, hypercombustion chambers, ether transmission matrices, basically enable the society to create even more weird and wonderful devices. They always have a baroque feel, as if basically they've leapt from Pulp Fiction or Victorian Age sci-fi. When I talk about the goggles and steampunk outfits, I mean goggles and steampunk outfits. Death rays, robotic servants built of brass, powered by clockwork. Fantastic space or aquatic vehicles spring to mind when you are discussing the Society of Aether. They see the science of the technocracy with disdain. They abhor its static view on the nature of things. Basically, they think their wayward cousins basically took the romance, the love, the dreaming out of science, and they hate them for that. Scientific practices are not predictable mechanisms that can be recombined at a near endless rate, but a dynamic and chaotic process. As one of their major teachers, Kitab al-Asir, teaches, everything is true, anything is possible. So, the society actually believes the spheres are different aspects of ether. This is an important part about their things, that each of them is a different part of ether. I'm not going to go into all of them and mention all of them because I could just list them off and what they are, but you can look up what they believe each of the spheres are in their version of ether. The one I will give for an example is time as the study of Kajak calls out. But all of the society work towards the touch of true ether. According to them, the legendary tense. The 10th sphere stuff gets into a dynamic of what it goes for ascension and unity and stuff like that, and they look at it as true ether. So there is talk of that and what it is. It's not something we necessarily need to dive into. That's talking about spheres and ascension and stuff. But just know, true ether is what they see. What's their history? How did they get to be part of the Council of Nine? What drove them away, the Technocracy? Well, it's a complex story, and we have to look back to their original origins. The oldest origins they have deal with, of course, major people in philosophy, especially in ancient philosophy. Many of their teachings come from Atreus, who apparently had learned from refugees of lost Atlantis. According to the society, Atlantis was an ideal society that harnessed ether to its full potential, and then some cataclysm struck it down. Artaeus recorded his knowledge, and in a material called the Kitab al-Asir, which survived Troy's sacking thanks to his pupil Parimethes, who fled to Athens with this, where it's translated by Aristotle, who deduced the fifth element out of the strictures. The remaining texts were forgotten in a library until Arab translators took the book, and then a young Italian mage, Lorenzo Golo, found an example through his travels, while the Templar Simone di Lonet also found a copy when he joined the First Crusade. The two of these later on met in Paris. Finding that they had the same book, they decided to try to decipher it, and they founded House Golo within the Order of Hermes in 1171. So this is the first version of a group based on these beliefs of the Kitab al-Asir. This book. This important document. The words out. Europe had at that time a dormant scholarly magical institution. It's the Dark Ages. And there was an internal strife with House Verdius. House Golo only lasted for 17 years before it disbanded. But the later two would found the Natural Philosophers Guild in its place. Basically, they went from that to a new organization that would be the true forerunner for the Sons of Ether. The true essence. But we still have to get through Renaissance. Golo and Olirant came into conflict with the church during their studies. Olirant was excommunicated in 1190 for heresy. They looked for a patron that would help them in their studies, especially for mortals. They found an ally in the Order of Reason, whose R. Paracelsus was similar to the outlinings in the Kitab al-Asir. So they joined forces, and the guild discovered various conventions of the new order spreading knowledge of ether. Golo died in an accident trying to create an airship. On 1283, a scroll fell into the hands of a Spanish scribe. He found a secret society based on the Paracets, which some account calls the people of Parameses, which was outside the guild's influence. They would later join the Celestial Chorus and eventually reunite with the Voltaigne Order. Again, this is basically a great way of saying the pupils were a side group that founded for similar things, was in Celestial Course for a while. When the Voltaigne Order formed out of both of these, that was where we get into forming more. We're going down the list of moving groups around and philosophies and building the what is the society doing. The disciplines of Atreus prospered in the era of the Renaissance, in which seemed science knew no boundaries. The enemy was clearly defined by its archaic, unsophisticated rites and barbarism, and most followers of Atreus were proud to fight against the hordes of the unreasoned. Basically, during this time, they saw things with what they wanted to see. In 1806, the formation of the Voltairean Order, on the precipice of Ascendra Volta, reassembled the followers of Artaeus' book in one convention. It was a time for helping people for the Order of Reason in 1851, when the Order became the Technocratic Union, They were renamed the Electrodyne Engineers, who focused on the transmissions of energy in all forms. One of their popular theories was the existence of lumiferous ether, as was stated in Astrolinian's works. So, yeah. They had all these similar beliefs. They finally are together. They're one group. They're doing great. But offense happened. Many were offended when the Union moved against the young and brilliant Serbian Nikola Tesla via the more predictable Thomas Edison. To the Invisible College, Tesla represented all the dangers of scientific paradigm without proper control and procedure, while to the Electrodyne Engineers, he was a figurehead of the innovations, innovative nature of science and inspiration. His ruination already set tensions high, and when the higher echelons turned against the engineers for their attempts to advance the timetable too quickly, by moving the concept of lumiferous ether out of the consensus in 1904, a short time after the Invisible College had become which controlled the technocracy, the engineers left, renaming themselves the Sons of Ether in order to honor the concept that was essential to their doctrine. Basically, most technocracy supported Edison. What would become the Society of Ether, Sons of Ether at this point in time, supported Tesla. The Sons, at the time, joined the Council, claimed the Seat of Matter, which was vacant since Sulfati had been banished from the traditions. They provided a lot of information on the Technocratic Union, and allowed the Council of Nine to act as a council with full members for the first time in a while. Now we reach modern times. In 1900, Tsar Varga, one of the most infamous Sons of Ether, attended the Paris expedition, intending on proving that ether actually existed and breaking the technocratic paradigm in one of the greatest feats of science, capital S science. Instead, his device, however, instead of an energy device, weapons were his main focus, which enraged the Mage greatly. Basically, he wanted it to be used for energy. At the Expo, weapons were a big focus. He believed the purpose of science, capital S, was peace and cooperation, not conflict. So he was pissed off. In 1914, only a short time before the outbreak of World War I, he manifested himself in Paris in an airship, announced his intent to bring the world peace if all governments would step down under his benevolent rule. The Technocratic Union stopped, and his deeds were erased from humanity's collective memory thanks to paradox in the Union's cover-up. But it proved that determination and loyalty of the new tradition to their peers. Basically, you have to think, this is a group that had been in our enemies, which had fought us for centuries, now part of us. This entire thing, though this guy went rogue, proved that they were not friends of the Technocratic Union. And it proved loyalty to prisons. In World War II, most of the Sons turned against Hitler when his involvement in the cult became apparent, let alone the concentration camps. Others continued to support the Axis, hoping to use the Third Reich to combine the technocratic paradigm. Both sides didn't end well. The tradition was basically damaged. They got involved. When you get involved in a massive conflict like this, especially one with very horrible things happening, it's not. But they got involved. Modern day has brought some release to the society. The uncertainty principle, quantum theory, the discovery of dark matter has given them hold in modern science, and they tend to exploit it before the technocracy can close the leak. The Avatar Storm has proven problematic because some of their members were trapped in the Umbra. So, nonetheless, the Society of Ether continues now in the modern day, going through its ups and downs and part of the traditions. But what is their organization? How do they work in a singular group? Well, if you're an initiate, oftentimes you come from the halls of academia. We're basically a prospective ether. is given a copy of Kitab al-Siyar. Should that student be able to break through the barriers of conventional logic, he's shown that he's right to join mentorship. These new students, as they're called, are led by their mentor through extensive cram sessions of conventional and awakened science. This is augmented by life and mind magic, so the student can study for days on end without, with stunning recall of the information later. The goal is for the student to gain a PhD level in their best field of research and a wide range of knowledges of other fields their mentors feel might be helpful. It doesn't equate to formal scientific training, but students should at least have practical skills to back up awakened genius, and know how to move through a lab without ruining experiments or harming themselves. This takes between 2 to 6 years based on their prior education and rate of progress. Once it's complete, the student creates a thesis, or an invention that must stand up to the scrutiny of 3 other society members. If they deem sufficient, they're now a researcher. A researcher encouraged to travel and pursue their own interest. Checking with their mentor occasionally, they're expected to bear responsibility of taking etherite research and inventions and disseminate down to students. They're also tasked with alerting the tradition of any promising students, though they're expected to allow a professor or chair to handle training if they wait. Some are given prospective students a head start on training. Some of these prospective students, they do give a head start on training and knowledge. Their final duty is to act as assistants to any professor or chair who requires aid for a project, be it funding, a lab assistant, or anything else without their help. It is allowed for one to turn down extended or onerous requests for aid, but they too easily deny requests. They will find others too busy to assist them in the future. So basically, if it's something that seems like maybe a little dangerous, a little hard, take a long time, it's okay for them to politely request, but just make sure you think about it before you do that. Eventually, a researcher becomes a professor, after they've proven themselves in a field and impressed their fellows. In game terms, becoming an adept in student. They require 1 chair or 2 professors in good standing to officiate the elevation. Thus, most professors need a somewhat settled life to keep better contact with the tradition as a large. They gain the ability to request research aid in their personal projects and can amass a good deal of personal power. They are expected to regularly demonstrate new scientific theory inventions, lest they fade into obscurity. The second highest position are chairs. They oversee a field of studies and direct the traditional research within it. Emeritus or council professors can appoint someone to a chair. Being a master of a sphere is a requirement for consideration. These were first created in 1878 and are limited number, each focusing on traditional affairs or specific axes of their science. Only a quorum of existing chairs, or emeritus, can create a new chair. Focus on some chairs do overlap, which can lead to members of either becoming staunch allies or bitter enemies. Some have vague boundaries. Sitting chairs often encourage professors under them to declare what field of science a given project is under. Who are you under, me or them? They have the power to approve over all scientific innovations under their purview, and can ban dangerous experiments or demand specific protocols. With only the council for the enforcement of scientific ethics being able to overrule. They have a council that, keeps ethics going. The highest ranking members are the Emirati, Archmages of Spheres. Other Emirati can promote a scientist to their ranks, even if they have refused chair or professor duties, but have the necessary might and understanding to experiment upon the terrarium itself. They're above overrule of any chair or professor, but rarely do so. Most reside off within the ether space, focusing on their own research projects that are reputed to include creating antimatter stars, deliberate time paradoxes, living spaceships. Advancement amongst the society is much like academia. They correspond and publish journals and papers on their theories, what's useful, interesting, practical applications. They have their own prestigious journal, the Paradigma. What factions? Let's talk about it. there are 6 factions I can mention that are their major factions. The Ethernauts, which have existed since the mid-1850s. They build ships, charter expeditions in ether space. In 1892, they successfully landed on the moon. But when the Order removed lumiferous ether from the consensus, the Ethernauts were the ones leading the walkout, basically. Since they had engaged in complex space battles with Void Seekers, using Aetherite as a shortcut into real space to ambush and attack projects. They divide their efforts into 3 fields: propulsion science, movement of spacecraft; material science, to create and construct vessels that can withstand the stresses of experimental propulsion systems; and human sciences, to prepare Ethernauts for the travel ahead, and less resources like food and oxygen. They lost a lot during the Avatar Sword, and are working on vessels that can withstand it so they can launch search and rescue missions. They're based out of London, and have secret research labs scattered around the world, including old Russian space program facilities and makeshift training labs in Canada. The Cybernauts were founded in the early 1990s with the goal of creating an etheric version of the assembly line to compete with the Technocratic Union. They decided to continue working together despite the failed mission. In 1861, when the Virtual Adepts joined the Council of Nine, they were excited to see their old friends, the Cybernauts, and the updates they'd made to old shared designs. The Cybernauts then decided to inform that information is ether, and collaborate with the Adepts on alternative information architecture. Since the Great Whiteout and the Avatar Storm, the Cybernauts have begun to refocus on their own projects again. They divide their work into 3 categories: brains, brawn, and blam. Brains oversee machine control systems. Brawn oversees body, creating physical forms of items, from vehicles to robots. Also, refining alloys and alchemy. And the blam oversees the machine power reserves, secondary systems, and weapons, if there are any. They have a quarterly symposium where research groups discuss their progress and finding. New groups form, and overall policy is decided by a democratic vote. The Utopians believe that Shine should benefit the sleepers just as much as possible, as soon as possible. They're like, our great developments should help the sleepers. They're made of psychologists, sociologists, historians, political theorists, use their backgrounds to find ways to integrate Aetherite inventions into consensus, into society, and bring improvements. The original ones saw the benefit of ether could be to humanity, free energy, universal health, and the Order of Reason's decision to pull it from consensus struck them as extreme behavior of their original goals. They encourage the development of non-lethal weapons, stun rays, knockout drugs, and discourage the creation of lethal weapons, though co-seen in areas with self-defense. During World War I, many Aetherite scientists got pulled into conflict, and weapons on both sides grew in cruelty and damage. The Council of Nine ordered them to create an internal code of justice to deal with criminals that could be subject of Euthanatos corrections. It's with the Utopians who formed the Council of Enforcement of Scientific Ethics, who prosecute awakened criminals during the Second World War, as well as rooting out Nefandi and Infernalists who attempt to infiltrate the society. So that council I mentioned earlier, hey, that's where they show up. The Adventurers is not a formal faction, but they're connected Aetherites that know what the label means, or at least have personal ideas. They go beyond the lab, and are renowned for not only unsettling habit of saving the tradition from inconvenience or doom, but also offering only marginal contributions to either science. So basically, they save the tradition from problems, but they don't really do a lot of science. The first known one was Matthew Hulebush, who tried to overthrow the colonial government of Belgian Congo. Since then, Aetherites have taken up an example, step out of the lab, work to be daring, and impose their consensus with force. Some examples are Sar Vargo and his airship coup to try to stop the Great War, and Doc Eon and Doc Monadel fighting Nazis. Despite this, the belief that adventurers aren't taking things seriously, the truth is that the journey they go on basically take them off the traditional path, opening up some new ideas, methods, to basically come back and incorporate their scientific methods. Their tools are portable, their bodies and minds are reformed to peak performance, and effects are instantaneous. They have little organization, often operate alone or in mixed tradition cabals. So, yeah, if you want to be in Society of Aether and Aetherite, adventure would be pretty cool. When necessity dictates the need for multiple adventurers to work together, they find camaraderie and compatibility, and they stick together for quite a while. A small faction, known as the Mad Scientists, exists too, first formed in response to the creation of the Council for the Enforcement of Scientific Ethics. They felt that they should be able to research whatever they like regardless of suffering or consequence they came from. They worked isolated or in very small groups in hidden laboratories, creating weapons, berserk robots, mutant diseases, other things that are frowned upon. They worked to avoid the Utopians and Enforcement Council's agents and other so-called meddlers in their works. Since the Avatar Storm, they have to revolt. And finally, the last major group is the Progressivists, because the society began to make goals, with a desire to help the planet. There was still a notably lack in diversity of membership in those leader positions. The tradition's business often took place in men's-only lounge, segregated facilities, cutting off a number of bright minds. The rise of women's suffrage, brilliant female scientists like Marie Curie, began more serious conversations. It made it harder for them to label as average intellectuals. Then an anonymous article in Patagrima revealed some crucial information that deeply shook the tradition, and revealed that some of the most important celebrated inventions of the tradition were created by their partners or colonial servants. This was initially brushed off as a hoax, but then the same anonymous partners and colonial servants refused to aid the scientists who had taken credit. 2 chairs and several prominent scientists and professors could no longer execute or run the inventions attributed. And the enforcement of scientific ethics officially removed all ethnic and gender criteria for positions within the tradition. The progressivists are usually members of other factions, keeping the mindset of striving forward, not letting arbitrary divisions impede them. So basically, this is a result of aftermath. Effectively, if you're a great scientist, it doesn't matter where you come from or who you are, you're a great scientist, you should be accepted here. We're all about the science. Progressivists are just members that are keeping that alive. That idea that we have to keep that in mind. Don't let prejudices prevent you from finding great people in science and advocating for great science. Science, with a capital S, is first and foremost before anything. Granted, these are the people that drove the change from Sons of Aether to Society of Aether, which, it was a goddamn new century. They went along for it. Makes sense. And there are some within this group that do want to advocate being more involved in sleeper politics. They often look to innovations that often disregard populations, keep a watchful eye over promising social scientists, and root through researchers to look for bias. Nowadays, the Society of Aether has advanced considerably since the Progressives first formed, and most of the conflict is now more personal or political and less systematic than before. So they're removing a lot of systematic prejudices in their group, just for the good of science. Science first, above everything. Everything else is second. Though you can hate that guy over there just for hating that guy. If you personally know him, and then you hate them, that's fine. Personal hatred, okay. Don't make it about something else. That's the Society of Aether. It's an interesting group, It's the fact that they are formed out of a Victorian, boys' club, mentality. You have to think about it. Those old, Jules Verne novels, or, Around the World in 80 Days, where, it's this old society of humdrum white men in a room and going about things. That's really the Sons or Society of Aether in a nutshell to begin with. That's kind of where they got their start. But they still had that, romanticism of the Victorian age. And when the Technocratic Union wanted to go away from that kind of thing, they basically said, no. Romance, imagination, this love that science, capital S, has no bounds. That's what they want. And they found that in the Council of Nine Mystic Traditions. And they've been a well member of them for more than a century. And yes, a lot of their old, ways have similarly evolved over the ages. They've gone through their share of ups and downs. Certainly the Avatar Storm didn't help them at all. But they've built themselves and survived to this day. And still, the call of Ether is strong. The Aetherite still wants to find that true Ether out there. They will. Science will happen. Whether they're stuck in a lab working on something, making sure that their friends don't do anything unethical, going out on crazy adventures to save the world, and then coming back to their labs, or just scheming in the background going, "Wah-ha-ha-ha-ha-ha!" All of them true members of the society. Alright, I hope you enjoyed learning about them. I really did. I really did enjoy talking about the Aetherites here. They're a fun group. I feel like it's one of those things that it's important to see where they came from and how they evolved as a society. And certainly speaking, it's a fun one as a group. And if you want a little bit of if you want to do steampunk in a Mage The Ascension game, be an Ether. Be a member of the Society of Ether. You will be steampunk. It will be awesome. It will be fun. Thumbs up. Have like a clockwork machine or something working for you. Anyway, if you want to check out the rest of my stuff, you can always give a follow on Twitch or on YouTube, like, subscribing, the bell, as I said earlier. My comment for today, for anybody, whether you are, is, hey, have any of you out there played a Weather Society member, Son of Ether, depending on when you played Aetherite? Have you played a member of this group? I'm interested to know. This is one of those ones that I haven't done a lot of Mage games, so I haven't had a chance to play a lot. So, I'm very curious if anybody out there. Remember, check out my schedule. It's up on Discord, YouTube, and X/Twitter. It'll just tell you my schedule for the week, what videos are coming out when on YouTube, and when I'm recording them on Twitch, all that kind of stuff, on the stream schedules. The only things I'll shout out are my two major things that are beyond the normal tabletop stuff. My live play show, Crimson Queen, Wednesdays at 8. Check it out live there. We're playing Pathfinder 1st Edition. It's a fun. And then discussing tabletop on Saturdays at 6. Still, also do remember to check out my social media link below. And of course, everybody out there, I hope you enjoyed diving into Mage to me. I enjoyed this one a lot. But until the next time we chat about Mage somewhere else in the world of darkness, or somewhere else in the night, I bid out there you all a deep and